There you go.
Okay, all right. Welcome to class 3 of Religion and Politics in America. For those who are just joining for the first time, there's something that I've been doing every class, and that is this. The lectures themselves provide an overview. They're kind of, excuse me one second. I need sunlight.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you. The lectures are an overview, somewhat abstract, but broad and deep, hopefully, in trying to understand the intersection of religion and politics. But what I've done in the prior classes, and I'll continue today, is take specific examples from the media of the last week about the intersection of politics and religion. So let me begin with something I took out of the New York Times a few days ago, called "The Deification of Donald Trump Poses Some Interesting Questions." And I'm going to quote from this article in the New York Times. Trump, his family, and his supporters have been more than willing to claim that Trump is ordained by God for a special mission to restore America as a Christian nation. In recent weeks, for example, the former president posted a video called "God Made Trump" on Truth Social that was produced by a conservative media group technically independent of the Trump campaign. On June 14, 1946, God looked down on his planned paradise and said, "I need a caretaker." So God gave us Trump. Over the years, there's been a growing chorus of voices saying Trump is the defender of Christians and Christianity. Trump says this himself all the time. Quote, "When they come after me, they're really coming after you," unquote. There are photos of evangelicals laying hands on him in the Oval Office, which is something that Christians do when they ordain pastors or commission missionaries. People at his rallies carrying signs that say, "Thank you, Lord Jesus, for President Trump," and on and on. When the indictments came down on Mr. Trump during Lent last spring, there were references to the powers of government going after Trump like the Roman Empire went after Jesus. I have two articles here. One from the Times, I guess, and they're both from the Inquirer, but recently about the anti-abortion March for Life. And what I've done, I don't have the time to really quote much from this, is point out that, as it says here, thousands of opponents of abortion rights rallied on Friday at the annual March for Life as speakers urged the impassioned crowd to capitalize on the movement's major victory in the U.S. Supreme Court and keep fighting until abortion is eliminated. And to point out, and that's why I'm quoting from this, that this represents an intersection of religion and politics. Here's another quote. "The key message this year is that our work is not done," said Bishop Michael Burbridge, chair of the Committee for Pro-Life Activities for the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Here is another article about the same march, and in this case, there's a quotation from the abortion opponent who heads the Southern Baptist Convention's public policy wing. After Dobbs, I didn't want anyone to get the false sense that we were at the end of our work. So there's no question that it's an intersection of religion in politics. And finally, there's an article from the Washington Post of a few days ago about Central America and Nicaragua in particular, but it's not about America, but it's a concern about if the country, this country, becomes more authoritarian than what's happening in Nicaragua can happen here. And here's what's happening there. On January 14th, a bishop in Nicaragua, along with 18 other Catholic political prisoners, left Nicaragua and flew to Rome. The freedom for exile deal had been worked out between the Vatican and Nicaragua's dictator, Daniel Ortega, who has been at war with his country's church ever since he lent support to popular protests in 2018. And this goes on to talk about that conflict between the political leader and the religious leaders. All right, so let's now turn to today's class. Religion and the public interest. And a quote from Mohandas Gandhi to begin. Those who say that religion has nothing to do with politics do not know what religion is. Well, we're going to be talking about what religion is. So I'm just going to pick out some things to talk about. This points out that there is a substantial difference in the holiday greeting, Merry Christmas versus Happy Holidays, because these take on implied values, not just the fact that one is religious and one is secular. Saying Merry Christmas expresses a desire to give Christianity cultural preeminence. And then for others, it is clear that it is not a Christian salutation at all, and that it is not as important. And for Christians, that according to the author that I quoted, that's meaningful. Before discussing the public interest, we should review what the public is. As perceived by the founders, those framers who wrote the Constitution, it's everyone who lives in the United States. This encompasses all citizens, including those in prison, and all non-citizens in the country, whatever their nationalities and religions may be. Although the Constitution references citizens in many articles and amendments, there are others that pertain to everyone within the Constitution's jurisdiction. And just to demonstrate that point, I brought a copy of the Constitution that I'm going to quote from. So taking the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, in which rights are spelled out, there is a distinction made between citizens and persons. And the term people is often used in the Constitution to refer to everyone, citizens and non-citizens alike. But there is a distinction made So, Amendment 1, very famous First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people. People, all right, everyone, peacefully to assemble and petition the government. Second, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And Amendment 5, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime. All right, so all of these amendments refer to persons or people, meaning non-citizens as well as citizens. But in Amendment 14, and that's the one that has been in the press quite a bit lately, because that's the one that has Section 3 that says if you've been involved in an insurrection, you can't hold public office. That's the one under conflict right now, but it starts out, all persons born or naturalized in the United States, all persons are subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and they are citizens. So no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens. So the Constitution is very specific and very comprehensible when it makes the distinction between non-citizens as well as citizens. And that is what we're talking about when we talk about the public interest and how religion intersects with the public interest. Now, recall that the religious landscape survey that was in the last class lecture found that Christians represent 65% of the population. So other faiths are 6%, and those who are non-affiliated are 28%. The 34% of non-Christians, therefore, number over 112 million persons. Now that's relevant because the people who are proponents of Christian dominionism or Christian nationalism, as it's otherwise said, advocate for a Christian America. But Christian culture is clearly not in the overall public interest. So what protects the interests of all Americans? National and state laws that apply to everyone do it, and do so for particular religious, ethnic, and minority groups that may feel or actually be disadvantaged. So there is an ongoing effort to serve the public interest, but clearly not an effort on the part of those who are Christian nationalists. All right, let's move on about human nature and the Constitution. The Puritan emphasis on the inherent sinfulness of humankind.
Excuse me, Paul. Paul, just a minute. I don't think that you're doing a screen sharing, but I wanted to be sure that you weren't, because we're just seeing you, which is fine. But did you mean to be screen sharing?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And that's what we thought we were doing.
No, it's quite comprehensible without it. But
well, it would be nice to share the screen. And now I can't see the control for that. Meeting information.
Don't do that.
You've enabled screen sharing, I take it, yes?
Yes.
It's not showing up on the screen.
let's see.
As I say, it's fine. We're following very nicely.
I don't know what that is.
Try them. No, that's okay. That just gives us.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Don't, you're gonna leave, don't
No, I can't.
go to more.
No, I can't get rid of this. No.
I don't think you want to do that.
I don't want to-
Here, hit them more. Here.
Yeah.
See, there's.
Oh.
Here's the screen share.
Yeah,
Down
that's-
there.
Okay, got it.
Sort of other
Oh, it says here, Dave Cassie's screen is sharing.
So you,
So that has to be eliminated in order for me to share. Come back, where are you? Okay, there. I still don't see.
here's
Okay,
more.
I eliminated that people
go,
could
here.
share, and I'm going to go back in and say they can.
Okay,
So-
try again. Go to the more again.
Okay,
Whoops.
Well, let's share screen.
Yeah, there you go. And
Okay,
does that get it?
do you see my handout?
yes, I do. We see about human nature and the Constitution.
Thank you so much. Sorry, everybody, for the little burp. Okay, thank you, Susie. So we move on now to human nature and the Constitution. And the point of discussion right now is about the depravity and sinfulness of human nature. Would everyone in the classroom please raise their hand if they are depraved? Okay. The reason this is important because it is a theme in conservatism, in political conservatism, that is based on Protestant thought. The framers of the Constitution provided principles of government that the founders observed in constructing their alternative to the colonial framework. Although we are apt to think of the Constitution as a neutral set of institutional arrangements, it is full of morality, and this moral architecture infuses the system they fashioned and still guides the conduct of American political life. Now, I brought you to illustrate this point a copy of the Federalist Papers. I'm trying to show it in the screen, though it's a little blurry. The Federalist Papers were written by Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison. And in the very first paper, Hamilton, who was the brains initially behind the Federalist Papers, talks about people, and not in a very complimentary way. Here's what he says. He was talking about the Congress of 1774, which led to the writing of the Declaration of Independence. That body recommended, I'm quoting now, that body recommended certain measures to their constituents, and the event proved their wisdom. Yet it is fresh in our memories how soon the press began to teem with pamphlets and weekly papers against those very measures. Not only many of the officers of government who obeyed the dictates of personal interest, but others from a mistaken estimate of consequences from the undue influence of ancient attachments or whose ambition aimed at objects which did not correspond with the public good, were indefatigable in their endeavors to persuade the people to reject the advice of that patriotic Congress. In other words, you couldn't rely on the people to be virtuous and to introduce what would be good for the public interest. In the next see. Oh, yes. In the next paper by John Jay, well, that was John Jay. Okay, let's go back to Alexander Hamilton. It cannot be doubted that much of the opposition to the Constitution which has made its appearance or may hereafter make its appearance will spring from sources blameless, at least if not respectable, the honest errors of minds led astray by perceived jealousy and jealousies and fears. So numerous indeed and so powerful are the causes which serve to give a false bias to the judgment that we upon many occasions see wise and good men on the wrong as well as on the right side of questions of the first magnitude to society. This is the way they wrote back in the 18th century. This circumstance, if duly attended to, would furnish a lesson of moderation to those who are ever so thoroughly persuaded of their being in the right in any controversy. And a further reason for caution in this respect might be drawn from the reflection that we're not always sure that those who advocate the truth are influenced by purer principles than their antagonists. Ambition, avarice, personal animosity, party opposition, and many other motives not more laudable than these are apt to operate as well upon those who support as those who oppose the right side of a question. So as a consequence of these, if you wish, truths or alleged truths about human nature, the Constitution was written to make it limited as to what people can contribute. And that is pretty much a good reason why the word democracy does not ever appear in the Constitution. America was not intended to be a democracy. It was intended to be a representative democracy, not a pure democracy, in which people would elect statesmen, hopefully, to represent them in the public interest. Two important political conclusions were reached. First, because governments were the creation of fallible mortals, no government could be expected to act with rectitude. Quite the contrary, a government that reflected the sinfulness of its human creators would be prone to exceed its rightful authority. Therefore, prudence dictated that the power of government be limited and that we should leave nothing to human virtue that can be provided for by law or constitution. Second, because God was the only source of redemption, it was not the task of governments to make people good. The highest aspiration for government should be merely to subdue the most blatant excesses of human behavior. So, questions to think about? How does the Constitution actually reflect the founders' distrust of people's capacity to be virtuous? And are conditions different today from what they were in 1787? One thing I can consistently find in my studies of the making of the Constitution is that it's as though you're looking at today's events and today's dynamics and today's people's attitudes. But now moving, and oh, just to finish that thought, that was a major reason why democracy was limited to males over the age of 21 who were white and who owned property and paid taxes. They were the only people for a number of years after the Constitution was ratified who had the ability to vote. Okay, moving on now to the religious aspects. The political intervention of churches and religious groups has often been condemned as overly divisive, ideologically biased, and politically induced. And a 2017 poll by the Pew Research Center showed Americans are unsure about the propriety of mixing religion in politics. And 2/3 of respondents to polling then believe that churches should not endorse candidates, and about half say that churches could keep out of politics altogether. However, it was understood sub rosa that churches could be a politically potent resource for mobilization and participation. This is why activists continue to seek the support and endorsement of religious figures and organizations. And I must point out, too, that churches are not the issue in terms of religious intersection with politics. It's people who are religious, not the churches as institutions as such, but people who belong to churches, but who on their own or through organizations with which they're affiliated are the ones who try to perpetuate their own religious values in the political system. So mobilizing religious interests. How are they served in politics? Somebody has to say what's wrong and what the group thinks should be done. This requires collective action, petitions, voting, protesting, striking, boycotting, or lobbying. Lobbying and advocacy by national or statewide organizations. The formation of a widespread social movement to spur collective action using methods of community organization. And as I was talking earlier about the march by anti-abortion supporters, that's how these all came to be. What is the motivation to act politically? What better rationale can there be than God says so? Religion has a remarkable ability to catalyze tremendous social change. Okay, group event identity, the first source of motivation, is the collective identity that individuals internalize. And those are the individuals I'm talking about, who try to have their values imposed on the public sector. How does one see and interpret the world? Group-based patterns of political judgment are influential, especially if they're grounded in tradition. Group status. Whether it's true or not, religious group members may believe that they are not valued by society, and that's exactly what we hear from Christian nationalists and from white Christian men. This provides a second motivation for political action. They may perceive that they're under attack and work to protect their status and social influence. And this is just what both Alexander Hamilton and James and John Jay were talking about. This has been apparent recently in surveys of white Christian men who believe they are being discriminated against, and the efforts being made to replace them with women, Blacks, and minorities. Think of the march in Charlottesville, where that was voiced by the participants. Religious values. How do religious values affect status distinctions? Religious beliefs may not just reflect society's value distinctions, such as socioeconomic differences, class differences. They may be causing those distinctions. Is one group more economically prosperous than another, more educated, more influential in the arts and sciences, or more influential in controlling a community's newspapers or system of governance? And populists believe this is the case, that liberals are more powerful and consequently must be restrained, if not destroyed. Theology and identity. How does theology have an effect? One of the writers of this book on religion and politics reports that scholars have found that religious beliefs and affiliations can be predictors of core political values. And the writer says, and if you disagree, don't hate me. The individualistic theology of fundamentalists, evangelicals, and charismatics may engender political preferences for individualistic economic policies and opposition to taxation, spending, and governmental activism in economic affairs. How people see God influence their understanding of sex, science, economics, and patriotism, which form identity in politics. People with a conservative orientation are more likely than religious liberals to stress the need for obedience rather than skepticism or dissent. Persons whose religion stresses charity and community are quite politically different from those who are concerned with individual sin and the afterlife. There are also differing views of moral authority, from religious doctrine versus human reason and experience. Okay, I'm going to move along a little faster. Political issues reflecting doctrinal differences may include federal arts funding, Obamacare, abortion, the causes and control of crime, feminism, same-sex marriage, welfare, transgenderism, and many more. So, and we see opposition to these right now in the House of Representatives. But there are also cooperative coalitions of religious groups when issues may affect them all in common, despite differences in their doctrines. For example, Orthodox Jews, Roman Catholics, and mainline and evangelical Protestants have been effective in working together in the pro-life movement. Politics affecting religion versus religion affecting politics. Although the focus in this course has been the influences that religious groups wield to shape public policy, the reverse is sometimes true as well. Unwelcome positions and actions on culture war issues, for example, sexual identity, can lead people to revise both their religious orientations and partisanship. Here's a quotation from the book. Citizens habitually update their party loyalties, their beliefs, their preferred religious texts, and their religious commitments to better reflect their preferences on divisive culture war issues. The effects of people's religious philosophies. There has been research on 4 different aspects of personal religious philosophy. First, is religion focused more on personal or social problems? These authors, just to divert from this quote for a moment, these authors about religion and politics tend to classify mainline church Christians, Presbyterians, Methodists, Lutherans, Episcopals, and so on, as mainline, and that their values tend to be much more community-oriented versus the fundamental churches, evangelical churches, in which people tend to be more individual in their orientation, seeking to be safe from sin and assured of eternal life. And that kind of individualism versus public interest tends to separate the two forms of Christianity and worship. Okay. So first, is religion focused more on personal or social problems? Second, what is the message? Is a doctrine restrictive, setting limits and regulating conduct, or offering release through forgiveness? Third, do lines of communication flow downward from God or horizontally from person to person? And four, what is the primary task of the religion? To offer individuals comfort or to rebuild society? The findings are that advocates of social release, horizontal and communal orientations are more likely to be support liberal political causes than their opposites. And this has implications for the behavior of elected officials as well. Concurring research found that those who felt close to God when working for justice and peace were disposed to political liberalism on issues such as abortion, defense spending, and school busing. And in terms of differing world views that have a moral basis, Jonathan Haidt, who's a researcher and who recently published a book about this, found opposing moral positions that increased political and religious division. He found 5 poles: care or avoidance of harm. These are all values of religion, moral values. Fairness versus cheating, loyalty versus betrayal, authority versus subversion, and sanctity versus degradation. I'll talk about this in a later lecture, but for the moment, let us understand that Haidt had come to the conclusion that liberals, after a lot of study, and by the way, liberals value the first 2 of these much more than conservatives do: the care or avoidance of harm and fairness. And that can be evidenced today in DEI, which you see often in newspaper reports: diversity, equity, and inclusiveness as liberal priorities based on their values, whereas there's an effort to remove these from corporations on the part of conservatives, who all believe that the next 3 moral principles or values are just as important as the first 2, and that is loyalty. Authority. Why are police supported and the military supported so much more by conservatives than by liberals? It's because their value of authority is important. And sanctity, which they seem to believe that liberals don't believe in. Institutional interests. This is a final source of motivation for people of faith engaging in politics. The various Christian denominations or faith-oriented associations, churches, and synagogues, interest groups, religious schools, religious broadcasters, social service providers, and charitable organizations all have stakes in particular public policies, they hope to mobilize constituents in support of their causes. One reason, of course, is, many of these are not for profit, and they have to rely on donations to continue to serve the public. For example, Catholic hospitals and universities lobbied aggressively against including contraception in Obamacare. This had both moral and financial implications, as well as service implications. If a pregnant woman whose pregnancy turns bad is in a Catholic hospital or seeking care there. So American churches have supported extensive systems of elementary, secondary, and higher education in schools other than public schools, requiring equally extensive government assistance. And for those who are very much in favor of the separation of church and state, this is a point of contention. And we'll get to that when we talk about Supreme Court decisions. Studies of voting for the additional funding for public schools have revealed a high level of opposition from Catholics, and groups may perceive that one political party or the other will better further their interests, and they will support that party. These loyalties to religious values and institutions and a party that supports them may persist long after the original causes no longer exist. And finally, our third handout now gets away from theological religion into civic religion. And we see civic religion and may not notice it. One nation under God. America has a civil religion. You're likely to find this in every country that is not a theocracy in which God-centered religion dominates the society and its governance, such as Iran. Civil religion is different. It aims to be compatible with a secular society that is non-sectarian. The religious aspects are implicit and usually aren't noticed by the citizens, who accept them as simply parts of society that good citizenship supports. It serves as a social cement that brings citizens together. It's a kind of folk religion that has a political culture and dogmas, but it's not theological faith related. It may be noticed when citizens or immigrants fail to observe the norms of a country's civil religion. Then those who unconsciously adhere to the norms may feel uncomfortable and see such lapses as something not normal. So what does civil religion look like? It has a nationalistic moral foundation expressed through public rituals and sacred symbols, and I'll run down a list of examples. But to begin, the singing of the national anthem, saying the Pledge of Allegiance, saluting the national flag, which is considered sacred, celebrating Thanksgiving, Memorial Day, and President's Day, being willing to serve in the military, and venerating veterans. And you can think about what those all imply in terms of their religious basis or origin. Here are some other examples. The invocation of God in political speeches and public monuments, and I believe that is true, so help me God. Taking an oath and ending with, so help me God, and God bless America. The quotation of religious texts on public occasions by political leaders, the veneration of past political leaders. What does that mean, the veneration? Well, you cite them. You cite Abraham Lincoln and the Gettysburg Address. You take inspiration and value from things that have been said by political leaders, such as George Washington's farewell address, or Abe Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, or any number of other, or Martin Luther King, or even the German minister who talked about Nazis coming for the people, and his Bonhoeffer, not Bonhoeffer. At any rate, first they came for the unionists, then they came for the communists, then they came from etc. He goes on to say, and I didn't say anything because I wasn't a unionist, I wasn't a communist, and then after he goes through a list of these, and then they came for me, and there was no one left. Remember that one? That's very famous, and that's venerated. And it was a minister who articulated and enunciated that statement. The use of lives of leaders to teach moral ideas. George Washington did not cut down the cherry tree without admitting to it. Abe Lincoln returned a penny that he had found. Honest Abe was the name they gave him. Parades to display the national flag on patriotic holidays, ceremonies in the inauguration of a president who puts his or maybe her hand on a Bible or a Quran, monuments commemorating great leaders of the past or heroic events, monuments to dead soldiers, mostly found in the public squares of old villages, or past or historic events, monuments to dead soldiers or ceremonies to remember them, expressions of sacred reverence for the national constitution or the presidency, expressions of hatred toward another country perceived as being an enemy, public display of the coffin of a recently deceased political leader, and that was recently done in the Capitol for what was Clyburn, James Clyburn. Public display, use of founding myths, and other national myths to educate children and guide adults. Yes, I cannot lie, I did cut down that cherry tree. Adulation of a Moses-like leader, such as George Washington. Celebrating prophets, such as Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and the founding fathers. Go to the Constitution Center and you will see life-size statues of the 55 men who were the framers of the Constitution. It's kind of spooky. Visiting sacred places, where I always take out-of-town visitors, by the way, such as Valley Forge and Mount Vernon, Independence Hall. Studying scripture, such as the Declaration of Independence or the Gettysburg Address. Now, if you've never thought of these as part of a civic religion, please do so. From these examples, one can see the complexity and the depth of civil religion and the dogmas that are part of it. It becomes a piece of society after a long process of acculturation. It encourages citizens to celebrate the nation and conversely to hold it to account. In its priestly aspect, civil religion helps to cement loyalty to the nation. God blesses America because it serves a sacred purpose. So long as the nation conducts its affairs according to some higher aim, it warrants allegiance from its citizens on grounds other than mere self-interest. And think of the Hillsborough, well, I think it's the Hillsborough Church that used to turn out at military events and public events to criticize them because God was disfavoring America because of homosexuality and all the other sins and vices. That bespeaks to this particular sentence I just read. But civil religion can also degenerate into mere religious nationalism via an ideology that fuses God, country, and flag, which is what Christian nationalism is all about, to beat down anyone who criticizes the USA or acts disrespectfully. We saw that during the Vietnam War. The idea of Americans as chosen has stimulated nativists, these are anti-immigration, to promote anti-immigrant ethnocentric views. Civil religion also provides standards by which to judge a nation's behavior and to criticize it when it departs from moral codes. A nation under God is responsible to God. Because transgressors suffer punishment from a just God, citizens have an incentive to keep the nation firmly on the path to righteousness. This is the prophetic function of civil religion, often expressed by social critics, such as Martin Luther King, when he admonished American Christians to challenge racial segregation. Many religious leaders, such in concert with King, have reserved the right of disobedience when they see human law in conflict with divine law. Abraham Lincoln expressed both the priestly and prophetic views of civil religion. Although untouched relatively by church religion, Lincoln saw America with a divine purpose, as revealed in the principles of the Declaration of Independence. For Lincoln, the commitment to secure free government sanctified by sacrifice was the higher aim of the USA, and that's what he put into his Gettysburg Address. He characterized the deaths of Union soldiers in transcendent terms, saying their sacrifice on the cause of liberty had affirmed the sacredness of the American mission. He called on Americans to respond with increased devotion to the cause for which those who died had given the last full measure of devotion. He thundered against slavery and saw the bloodshed and violence of the war as God's retribution. Although George W. Bush and Barack Obama often invoked American exceptionalism, they differed in the sense of a national mission. Obama saw a prophetic version in terms of America's founding ideals. Chosenness confers an obligation to live up to those values in the conduct of our public life. In contrast, George W. Bush's priestly rhetoric suggested that America's way is God's way, and to perceive military power as the means to realize God's vision on earth. The USA therefore deserves to be the model for other nations because it has been chosen by God. Right back to Plymouth Rock. The bottom line is that America reflects many aspects of religion in both its laws and national culture. Americans continue to accept this condition as normal. In many other instances, there is conflict between the priestly and prophetic views. Political conservatives want to sanctify government behavior, and religious liberals tend to denounce it. A loss of balance between the priestly and prophetic roles robs religion of a distinctive voice and makes it a source of conflict rather than consensus. By suggesting that Americans share a common faith, such as Christianity, that binds the nation to God, this seemingly inclusive language actually excludes some people, such as atheists, agnostics, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, Jews, and the religiously unaffiliated. We see that civil religion only partly unifies Americans of diverse religious traditions. And here are some stages of assimilation of all Americans, and they vary. There's the cultural assimilation, which immigrants generally undertake. They stop celebrating their land of birth in holidays, the clothes they wear, the music they hear, and they embrace new groups, doctrinal norms. My wife's grandfather did that when he came from Germany. He immediately said, I'm American now and not German anymore. And he eschewed all his German previous life. Structural assimilation, leaving a mainstream church to join a different type, liberal or conservative divisions, Latin or English, Catholic masses, Episcopal versus Reform Episcopal, conservative versus Reform versus Orthodox, Judaism or becoming a Mormon. Marital assimilation, intermarriage between members of different religious groups, efforts to allow or deny outsider children in religious schools. Or civic assimilation, joining a religious group because of agreement with that group's political mission, service to the poor, climate change, or civil rights. As reported in social science literature, we all need to belong to a group, but not necessarily a religious one. As individuals, we may often feel lonely, anxious, isolated, and in despair. We can certainly belong to multiple groups for business contacts, for education, for comfort in the midst of others who share similar values. But religious groups have other features that secular ones lack. We believe that God will bless our mission in the midst of other believers. It gives us a reason to transcend our worst impulses. This gives us stability and reassurance, comfort, hope, and for many of us, eternal life. Thank you. I will open this room and this Zoom group to any questions or comments that you care to make. Jim Cochran, Susie, and then Dallas.
Do you want to do another?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
Jim.
Okay. Thanks.
What you say, if I read it right, the reverse can happen, that government policy can create divisions in a church. That happened in the Civil War to the Presbyterian Church. It's happened, I think there was an effect of Nazi Germany on religion. And there are probably other examples of, I know in the Presbyterian Church, people left when it was okay to ordain gay pastors and section members.
Mm-hmm.
So it works. This is a back and forth kind of thing, it seems.
Yes. Actually, I said that. It's back and forth. The comment, if you didn't hear it on Zoom, is that.
Actually, we heard it very well, Paul.
Pardon?
We heard it
You heard
very
it?
well.
Okay, very good. All right. Next we have Dallas.
The civil rights movement was really influenced, or ministers really influenced their congregations. And of course, we honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who really initiated many different types of movements to eliminate racism.
Yes. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
The demographers show that Black Protestantism is very different from white Protestantism. And in the Black Protestant world, or in the Black culture, as from what the research has evidenced, clergy play leadership roles in community. And so that the church has become very important in civil rights and in human rights. Peggy, is it?
Yeah, several years ago, when there was a shutdown, Congress was arguing about it, mostly due to the activities of Ted Cruz, who refused to agree to something, I can't remember what. There was a wonderful talk in the Senate by Michael Bennett, which you can probably still see on YouTube, where he goes through how the founders of our country, and this handles, they're not believing very much in good human nature. They wanted people to argue within the Senate. They wanted opposing opinions that was good because they felt that instead of like all the Republicans say, oh, we all have to believe the same thing. And they wanted that because they felt the result was a combination that took the good sides of both viewpoints. And that this was really one of the purposes of what the way they created Congress to act.
Well, thank you. Yes, Toma?
Oh, Paul, in honor of our commitment to 12 o'clock, I am going to ask that we close the meeting now, but we do look forward to, this is a series, and so we'll have a chance next week too, to continue.
Okay,
It's time to end.
thank you. We'll continue in this room, however, for anyone who has,